Welcome to U.S. History to 1877. In this course, you will survey the major themes, events, and ideas of American history through Reconstruction.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from Alan Brinkley's The Unfinished Nation, The American Yawp, and our course-assigned OpenStax U.S. History textbook. This lecture focuses on women, family legalization, and the institutional work of Reconstruction. The core question is this: how did women turn emancipation into Reconstruction through marriage, records, schools, churches, and mutual aid? The core competency is to confirm the contributions of American women to the cause of Reconstruction.
What does freedom look like on an ordinary weekday when amendments exist on paper, but schools, marriages, and relief still depend on local labor? Reconstruction did not happen only in Congress, state conventions, and Army headquarters. It also happened in courthouses where marriages were registered, in church basements where aid was distributed, in schoolrooms where adults and children learned to read, and in households trying to reunite after years of sale and separation. Women stood near the center of that work. Northern teachers, Black mothers, church workers, nurses, and mutual aid organizers all helped translate emancipation from a legal fact into an operating social order. Their labor can be tracked through attendance rolls, mission reports, marriage licenses, relief accounts, and church records rather than through formal office holding alone. That work changed events because slavery had damaged the ordinary institutions of daily life. Marriages often existed by custom or religious recognition while lacking legal force. Families had been separated by sale, literacy had been restricted, and Black congregations had operated under constraint. Domestic labor, caregiving, and child rearing had been shaped by the demands of masters rather than by secure household authority. Emancipation, therefore, did not uncover a stable civic order waiting to bloom. It created a huge Reconstruction problem at the level of kinship, schooling, worship, and community maintenance. Women's contributions are clearest when freedom is measured by what a family could do on an ordinary weekday. Could spouses record a marriage the law would now recognize? Could children attend school? Could a church meet under Black authority and collect money for the sick or the poor? Could a teacher keep a classroom open despite white threats and scarce supplies? These were civic questions as much as private ones because they determined whether citizenship would exist in forms people could use. The antebellum order had denied basic legal protections to Black family life. An enslaved marriage could be broken by estate sale, debt settlement, or a master's decision to move labor elsewhere. Parents and children could be separated for years with no legal remedy. In many states, teaching enslaved people to read had been discouraged or criminalized, especially after revolts such as Nat Turner's in 1831 intensified white fear of literacy and communication. Worship also existed under surveillance, with plantation churches, white supervision, or limited movement shaping how people gathered. After 1865, freed people made family repair and education urgent priorities because slavery had attacked those areas directly. Bureau offices and newspapers filled with notices from mothers seeking sons sold to Louisiana, husbands seeking wives taken west, and siblings trying to recover kin scattered by wartime dislocation. A legal marriage certificate changed events because it created documentary recognition of relationships that slavery had refused to protect. It affected household stability, parental claims, inheritance questions, and the ability to present a family before employers, courts, and state officials. School building had similar urgency. Black communities across the South petitioned for teachers and buildings almost immediately after Union occupation or Confederate collapse. The American Missionary Association, various Baptist and Methodist mission boards, Quaker groups, Northern Aid Societies, and the Freedmen's Bureau all became part of that effort. Yet the material obstacles were serious. Schoolhouses had to be found or built, books had to be shipped, and teachers needed salaries, board, and protection. Roads were poor, violence was common, and local white hostility could shut down a class with threats, arson, or eviction. Hospital and relief work belonged to the same institutional world. War and emancipation left many communities with disease, hunger, and dislocation, and women often did the labor that kept households and neighborhoods functioning, while more formal agencies remained thin. Bureau records, church collections, and missionary correspondence all show women distributing clothing, tending the sick, and carrying information between families and officials. Reconstruction therefore depended on care work as much as on lawmaking, because a starving or sick community could not sustain schools, churches, or long searches for kin. Northern women teachers became one visible part of Reconstruction's institutional labor. Many came from New England, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Old Northwest under missionary sponsorship. They worked in cities such as Richmond, Charleston, New Orleans, and Nashville. though they also taught in smaller inland towns and rural districts. A teacher might instruct children during the day, hold adult classes at night, keep attendance records, write reports back north, and negotiate constantly over rent, supplies, and personal safety. The work involved classrooms crowded beyond design, shortages of slates and readers, long walks by pupils, and frequent uncertainty over whether a building would remain usable from one month to the next. Black women supplied the local labor that made many of those schools possible. They hosted boarders, cooked meals, watched younger children, raised subscription money, repaired clothing, and sometimes taught directly. Their names appear less often in northern reports, and though their role was central. Schools operated because communities kept them operating. A local woman who organized benches, collected pennies, or maintained order around a school site was building the educational infrastructure of freedom as directly as any visiting instructor. Marriage legalization and family reunification revealed the same pattern. Couples appeared before ministers, bureau officers, or county officials to record unions that were often long-standing in practice. Women pursued these records because they strengthened parental claims and made family ties more secure in the eyes of employers, churches, and local authorities. Searches for missing relatives moved through church announcements, word of mouth, printed notices, and bureau correspondence. A mother following a rumor from Mississippi to Arkansas, or from Virginia to Texas, was doing more than mourning. She was reconstructing a household shattered by slavery and war. Churches and aid societies broadened this work into community governance. Black women organized clothing drives, food collections, nursing care, burial assistance, and support for the sick. They helped maintain congregations that served as worship sites, schoolhouses, meeting halls, and political gathering points. In many places, church dues and women's aid collections helped fund teachers or repairs when formal state support lagged. The church record book, like the marriage ledger and school roster, became part of the documentary life of freedom. Specific women make the structure easier to see. Charlotte Fortin taught among freed people on the South Carolina Sea Islands during the war and left a record of the educational and social labor required there. Harriet Jacobs and other relief workers assisted freed people through schools, fundraising, and aid efforts that linked Southern need to Northern supporters. Their names deserve attention, though the larger structure carries the heavier lesson. A visible handful stood on top of a much larger field of lesser-known women whose clerical, domestic, and educational labor kept institutions alive. The 14th Amendment provides a legal frame for this phase of Reconstruction because it nationalized citizenship while leaving daily Reconstruction to institutions that women helped build. Its declaration that all persons born or naturalized in the United States were citizens answered the older constitutional order that had denied Black national membership. Its due process and equal protection clauses implied a broader federal obligation towards civil rights. Yet none of that constitutional language automatically created a school, reunited a family, or paid a teacher's board in a county where white hostility remained strong. That tension is central. Citizenship in text could exist before citizenship in routine. A child could be born into national citizenship while still lacking safe access to a classroom. A married couple could belong to a citizen community while still needing a county official willing to record the marriage fairly. A congregation could rest on equal protection language while still depending on women who raised money, kept order, and cared for the sick. The amendment lifted the legal ceiling. Women's work built the floor under daily life. The amendment also clarified exclusions. The amendment did not establish votes for women, and many women who had worked in abolition or wartime aid understood that the post-war order centered Black male political rights before broader gender equality. That exclusion shaped the limits of citizenship, especially for Black women whose households, churches, and schools were deeply political, even without national voting rights. Their influence traveled through institutions, records, care work, and organized community labor, rather than through elective office. The same source gains another meaning when placed beside a marriage ledger or a school roster. Citizenship appears in the amendment as a national status, while those local records show the forms in which that status became legible. A teacher taking attendance, a minister recording a marriage, or a woman collecting dues for a relief society was not performing work outside constitutional history. She was helping turn constitutional language into routines that courts, employers, and local officials could not ignore so easily. Women's Reconstruction labor therefore belongs inside constitutional history rather than beside it. The amendment defined national citizenship, while women helped make that definition operative through marriage records, classrooms, aid societies, and church life. The legal source and the local institution should be read together. One without the other leaves the historical story incomplete. By the late 1860s, women had helped reshape Southern daily life in visible ways. Thousands of marriages had been legalized. Family search networks had reunited many relatives and left records of many more attempts. Freed people's schools operated across the region. serving children and adults alike. Black churches expanded as centers of worship, education, fundraising, and political communication. These changes did not end poverty or danger, though they gave freedom institutional form. Citizenship could now be seen in documents, buildings, routines, and associations that slavery had tried to prevent. The limits remained severe. Teachers faced harassment and violence. Families remained poor, and disease and hunger burdened newly formed households. State and local authorities could still narrow opportunity when federal backing weakened. Yet those limits make women's achievements more measurable, not less. Reconstruction endured where communities could record marriages, teach literacy, maintain churches, and circulate aid. Women carried large portions of that burden, often in forms that later historical memory undervalued because they looked domestic or charitable rather than formally political. Those institutions also outlived the high tide of congressional reconstruction. A church founded in the late 1860s could become the center of mutual aid in the 1880s. A school begun under missionary or bureau support could produce later teachers and ministers. A family recorded in county marriage books could claim a kind of legal stability. Slavery had refused altogether. Women's contribution therefore extended beyond immediate relief. It helped create the long social memory and institutional continuity through which Black communities weathered the counter-revolution that followed. The consequence reaches beyond this single meeting. Schools prepared future voters, office holders, clerks, and ministers. Legally recognized families created stronger households for labor bargaining and local stability, and churches became platforms for leadership, protest, and mutual support long after formal Reconstruction began to retreat. Women's contributions therefore belong to the central political history of the era. They built the daily institutions that would sustain Black communities through the achievements of Reconstruction and through the backlash that followed. Friedman's Bureau School reports underscore the scale of that contribution. Agents and missionary sponsors counted thousands of pupils in Southern classrooms by the late 1860s, though those totals represented a patchwork of rented rooms, church spaces, and improvised buildings held together by persistent local labor. Behind every enrollment figure stood women who cooked meals, washed clothes, copied lessons, comforted the sick, and kept the institution open long enough for literacy to take root. Those routines are part of the political record of Reconstruction, even when later summaries reduce them to background. The same pattern appeared in family records. A marriage book or search notice can look minor beside an amendment or a convention journal, yet those entries reveal how citizenship entered ordinary life. Women helped create and preserve those records, and the records remain among the clearest documentary traces of Reconstruction at work below the level of Congress. Marriage records, schools, relief work, and church administration show that citizenship had to be built in daily practice as well as in constitutional text. The harder judgment is what a nation owes the people whose labor made freedom usable while formal politics still withheld full recognition from many of them. Reconstruction depended on that work without fully rewarding it.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.